Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Hey, Pete, ever wonder what Steven Spielberg's favorite film is?
You know, Andy, I've heard he loves classics like Lawrence of Arabia, Meet Me in St. Louis.
Imagine chatting with him about why those films resonate with him so much.
That's exactly what we do on our podcast, Movies We Like. We've had incredible guests like actress Dee Wallace, cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt, director Steve Miner, and former Disney animators Tom and Tony Bancroft.
They share their favorite films and the impact they've had on their careers, offering fascinating insights into the craftsmanship and storytelling techniques that make these movies so special.
If you're curious about the magic behind the scenes, subscribe to Movies We Like from True Story FM on your favorite podcast app. New episodes are released on the fourth Monday of each month with early access for our members.
Join us on Movies We Like as we explore the movies we all like with the people who make them.
And Stephen, our people will call your people. Let's make this happen, puppy.
Subscribe today.
What's up, most excellent friends?
It's Chrissy and Nathan from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
It's a podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian
And their most excellent guests,
adventure their way through the 80s movies we think we love
or might have missed,
with our grown-up eyes to see how they hold up.
join us for delightful discussion,
Rollicking recaps.
ratings, and deep-cut recommendations.
Plus, members get some extra fun chit-chat with the hosts after the show.
Download the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast today at truestory.fm.
Or find it wherever the finest podcasts are stored.
And do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind.
Be excellent to each other and...
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
Hello and welcome to the last of the rebroadcast episodes of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Next week we'll be back to new content. But for now, how many times have you heard someone say that George Lucas was inspired, that one of his main sources of inspiration was the samurai movies he grew up watching? Well, there's one in particular that was very clearly a large influence, called The Hidden Fortress. It has plot points, scenes, dialogues that are taken almost, shot for shot straight into Star Wars in ways that you would never quite imagine. It's a great movie all on its own, but it's just so fascinating to look at it and see how much it influenced what George Lucas wound up putting on the screen that we all love still to this day. So please check out this episode. You can watch the movie beforehand, The Hidden Fortress. I believe it's available on Amazon Prime. But even if you don't watch it, don't worry. We're going to give you a summary, let you know what's going on, and most importantly, how it connects to Star Wars. So please enjoy this. Please think about becoming a member, sending us feedback. We always love to hear that. We'll be back next week with new content. We have spoken. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today, myself and Paul Hoppe are going back into the historical depths. We're talking about a movie called Hidden Fortress. It's a Japanese movie from the 50s that is known to have greatly influenced George Lucas as he was coming up with the ideas for Star Wars. We're going to talk about that and a good deal of feedback. Yes, I promise we're finally getting around to it. All that and more after a commercial break that I really hope is not from Struck Companies. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined as somewhat frequently by very much not a co-host, occasional guest, Paul Hoppe. Paul, how are we doing today?
We are doing medium today.
Okay.
The weather's terrible, but at least I got to watch an excellent, old-time movie last night and get to talk about it with my dear friend today. So, things could be worse.
It's kind of funny to me that you suggested this one, especially because one of the things that I've gotten into recently are the Godzilla movies, which are really quite good. Depending on what you're looking at. Like, the first one is actually just a great movie overall. The later ones are just, it's kaiju movies, but they're really fun. And so when you suggested another Japanese movie from the 50s, I was like, cool, this kind of becoming my brand at the moment.
Nice. Before
we jump into that, though, I want to do a little bit of feedback at the very start, and then we'll do most of it at the end. We got a great message actually through Patreon from Dylan Diggs. Dylan is a longtime commenter and listener on both of my podcasts as well as a lot of the Stranded Panda podcasts. Dylan and I have some very big political gulfs between us, and I know Dylan sent me an email that I'm going to, Dylan, I promise. But for everybody, I want to respond to what Dylan wrote on Patreon. This was after the message, the episode that Riki and I did about the strike, about what the podcast was going to do during the strike, and how I was going to be contributing 25% of my Patreon to the strike to the entertainer fund going forward. Dylan wrote, I just become a Patreon because of this cast today. My mother has been in SAG her whole life. I don't always agree with Matthew, even necessarily on if Rebels is crossing the line, but appreciate the thoughtful approach you're taking to this. Every time I listen, I know the content produced here is handled with care. I'll let Paul respond as well, but I just want to say, Dylan, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. I agree that for those who didn't hear the episode, we were talking about why we were not going to continue covering Rebels. And, one thing and I'll talk more about my stance in general at the end of the episode and give Paul a chance to comment as well. Want to make very clear, though, at the very beginning, there are specific rules being put out for actors and potential, members of the unions. I'm not that. But then separate from that are guidelines where it's kind of like, hey, here's things we're asking content creators to do. There's no consequences if we don't. And Rebels, I think itself was kind of edge case, I think, because Rebels is animation and has been made very clear. Voice actors in animation are not part of the SAG union. To the extent that SAG specifically said if actors who on strike want to do voice acting for animation, they're very welcome to do so. I still decided that I didn't want to kind of use that. It's not a technicality. It's a valid point, but it still didn't feel right for me, especially because now we've heard that the number of voice actors in animation are organizing a union themselves, which is kind of awesome, specifically for WB. I'm curious to see where that will go. But yeah, so I wanted to, later in the episode, we're going to explain more of our stance, pause some thoughts on that. But I want to just kind of say first to Dylan, thank you so much. Really appreciate the thought. And I'm glad that, people of very different stances on a whole bunch of issues can at least agree on this.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that my parents were both in film unions. I have thoughts about the whole thing, and I won't get deep into that right now, but I do think that there is there's what they're asking for, what they're telling you, which maybe I have some thoughts on that, but then also just the spirit of the thing, right? It's I think there's something to be said for just, trying to make an effort, listen to what people are asking you to do to help in, really fighting kind of more the imperial forces. Yeah. It's I don't like how the rebels always do everything, but I'm well, the empire's definitely worse. Yeah. And then here also a lot of voice actors in animation are in SAG. Right. They're just not operating. They're not doing SAG, union work because it's just the voice. It's not their physical image or I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's considered a different kind of work. And maybe that's really the case. Maybe we'll find out more about that. Yeah. So anyway, let's now get into Hidden Fortress, which is a Japanese-made movie. I think it kind of goes without saying, but, one of the reasons why we're looking at a lot of Japanese-made stuff, I'm going to be doing some stuff on BBC content, hopefully some stuff from South Asia, Bollywood and Hollywood and other content like that. Stuff from all around the world. And if you have suggestions, please let us know, is because it's hard. It's good to remember sometimes that Hollywood doesn't actually control all of movie making, and it never has. And there's always been a huge amount of cinema and TV shows being made outside the U.S. by completely non-union, often unionized, not always, depending on the country, but totally outside of that studio system that is being struck by the SAG and the Writers Union. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And Paul, why don't you kind of take it away? Why was Hidden Fortress something you suggested?
Yeah. First, I just want to quote in reference to what you said, something I saw recently that if you know it, you know it. I didn't leave acting. I left Hollywood, is a quote from something that we both saw recently that I think it's, Hollywood often thinks Hollywood is movies. Hollywood is acting. Hollywood is TV, right? Yep. But it's not. It's a place where some of it's made. Yeah. Hidden Fortress. I was thinking, you were talking about not wanting to cover any of these things out of respect for the strikes. And, Star Wars. And then you were talking about things that were not Hollywood unions, right? Yeah. That aren't directly related here. And so I was thinking, well, if you want to do something for Star Wars, why not do the film, that was made 19 years before, A New Hope. And, George Lucas said was a large part of the inspiration for, after watching it, I think some of the plot mechanics, there are a lot of similarities, which I don't know how much we're going to dig into those. We can. Yeah. But yeah, I just also I know my dad loved Akira Kurosawa. My mom loves Akira Kurosawa. And like, I think I've only seen The Seven Samurai. Like, I've never really had a big, like, Japanese cinema. I'm going to watch a bunch of movies. You know, and part of that is sometimes these days I'm like, well, I'll just wait till I actually learn Japanese and then I'll watch a bunch of, and I'm like, okay, but I'm like trying to learn like 3 different Chineses already. So like that might be more of a 10-year plan. So I was like, let's enjoy this movie now and we'll circle back to more others later, you know?
Just for clarity, is this a Kurosawa movie or do you just mean that?
Yes, this is a movie directed by Akira Kurosawa.
That's what I thought, That's what I thought,
Yeah. After he'd had some success in the West with some of his movies, but apparently, from what I understand, hadn't had as much success in Japan. And so this is, I think, one of the movies that kind of helped him achieve more success in Japan. That's from my very surface level, you know, Googling and watching a few things about it. And it also has Toshiro Mifune, who George Lucas actually wanted to cast as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And who I think for a long time was, you know, the most, I mean, probably to this day, the most recognizable face from Japanese cinema, right? And to the West, most recognizable face of the West, right? And so, you know, not having been around in the 50s, I don't know what it was like these movies being out and how they were received, you know, in the United States and elsewhere. But I do know that both my parents, you know, loved them and I wanted to watch it. So I was like, why not cover that for Star Wars? Cause it's like, you know, it's the back story.
Exactly. And for those who haven't seen it yet, you know, if you want to go see it, I do think it's very good. I'm going to talk a little bit about how accessible it is. We will give a plot summary in a few minutes. But so that either if you have seen the movie and it helps you remember it, or if you haven't seen the movie but still want to hear us talk about it, you'll get it. But I want to say a few other non-spoiler comments first. And this may be by way of helping to encourage you to watch it. I've said often that I find it very hard to watch things with subtitles. In part because of my ADHD, and then I just, you know, probably years and years of being in front of a screen, it's hard for me to just do nothing but watch a screen. And if I can look away every now and then and still hear the dialogue, I'm fine, like I'm folding laundry or something like that. But when I'm just watching, it's harder. One thing I've been finding with these movies, and I've enjoyed quite a lot of the Kurosawa movies as well. He did a series of Shakespeare movies that I saw when I studied Shakespeare in high school, including Throne of Blood and Rom, which are, I think Throne of Blood is a version of Macbeth, and I think Rom is a version of King Lear, but I saw them 25 years ago, so I don't remember exactly. But they're both very good. But same goes with some of the Godzilla movies and I think this is partially the style and partially just the time. The dialogue is fairly slow, in that it is often said in kind of a lot, like I think a lot of the actors are coming from stage acting and a lot of the people who are getting into cinema are coming from the stage. And so they're saying that kind of like you make a declarative statement and then someone else makes a declarative statement a second or two later. And there's also just lots and lots of panning shots of establishing the scenery, of showing you the army, of the fight scenes that are happening where people are grunting and, you know, maybe throwing out an insult every now and then. Compared to like some of the anime I've tried to watch, for example, I just think the number of words per minute is far less. And so for me, I think that really helps me watch as well because I enjoy those visuals and I probably lose a little bit by not, you know, having my eyes on the screen the whole time. And I do probably watch it, you know, far more than I do some other things. But because it is slower, because because the dialogue isn't rapid paced, and because there's all these kind of sweeping, establishing shots, I find as someone who struggles with subtitles that it's a lot easier to watch. So that just might be kind of further, and I think that is certainly helped by it being like, I'm sure movies that are being made about, you know, I don't know what the equivalent to like a rom-com was, or a movie that's much more talky. It's not about like ancient, history or, sweeping fighting or, things like that. They may be different from Japanese movies at the time, but certainly the ones I've seen like this that are kind of like samurai epics or things like that, I just found it much easier to watch. Yeah,
it's interesting that you say that. I actually found the subtitles harder to read because they're like written in white on black and white. It's a black and white film.
Yeah.
And But having said that, there's not a ton of dialogue, right? There's not a ton of exposition. A lot of the story is told through moving pictures, right? There are long periods. There's probably multiple times when there's just minutes at a time without dialogue.
Yep.
Where there's, and sometimes it's like, there's a scene where it's like, okay, this is like 2 minutes long or 5 minutes long. And these days it would be like 20 seconds long or 10 seconds long. It's like specifically they're climbing up this like mountainous hill kind of thing. Right. And there's all these rocks and they're stumbling and whatever. And, I think it's supposed to be, kind of physical comedy, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't hit quite the same way now that it did then, or maybe in the US compared to Japan. I don't know. But there are a lot of things where it's like, yeah, this probably goes on a little longer than it would be indulged today. Like if you actually look at the number of scenes per movie or scenes per minute kind of, or, how many minutes long an average scene is, it's way lower now. Yeah. Right. It's like, do what you're there to do, get in, get out, boom, next scene. And just in general, I mean, I grew up watching a lot of movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s, because, my parents were both so into film and worked in film. And so, I think that pacing doesn't really bother me. Yeah. But I do think I could feel in the beginning, I was like, this is taking a while to get going. So it might take, 20, 30 minutes to really feel, for a modern viewer, maybe to kind of get into it. But at the same time, there is stuff going on. And the dialogue isn't the dominant force, right? Yeah. And a lot of in the dialogue, like the tone of voice, the way something's conveyed it tells you most of like the meaning anyway.
Yeah. I think it's very true. I think it's which is a credit to the actors again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I will say, I think, again, I have by no means an exhaustive study of Japanese cinema from the time. I've watched a couple Kurosawa movies and a couple of Godzilla movies and like one or two others. But I will say, especially in those Godzilla movies that I've been watching recently, it's very much the same. Like there are scenes where whatever monster, often Godzilla, but some of their kaiju we're seeing that it's terrible and horrible and destroying buildings. And it destroys more buildings. Right. And it destroys more buildings.
Right.
Part of me is like, look, there's a guy in a rubber suit who gets to stamp all over these toy houses. He's having fun. Let him have fun. It's great. Yeah. But it definitely is like, in a modern movie, this would be very different. Right. One other thing I'll also say, though, is that particularly for this movie, and here we're going to kind of get in the spoiler section, but I'll just say this one last thing. And then definitely, if you want to see it, I would say stop. But I think for people who are Star Wars fans specifically and are watching it knowing that this is George Lucas's inspiration or one of them, you'll know that from the first shot. And that certainly helped me a lot because it starts with two people arguing as they're kind of in the midst of warfare, trying to figure out what to do. And now we'll get more into kind of spoiler section. And then what happens is they have a fight, they go in two different directions, and both of them get captured by the same group of people and then reunited, and they're super happy to see each other. And I was like, okay, I get it. And we'll talk more about that. But Paul, why don't you first give kind of a quick summary of the plot?
All right, here is the quickest summary I can allow myself. R2 and 3PO, I'm sorry, Tahe and Matashi are two peasants who sell their homes to travel to the front and join the war between the Yamana and Akizuki clans, only to arrive late and be mistaken for defeated Akizuki warriors, then pressed into bondage and servitude for Yamana. They're forced to dig for gold in an old Akizuki fortress, and when their fellow prisoners pull a one-way out, they wind up escaping and stumbling upon the gold elsewhere, hidden in sticks. A samurai named Makebe Rokuruta stumbles upon them as they stumble upon his hidden fortress, and he decides not to kill them when they explain their plan to escape Akizuki territory by going straight into Yamana first to get to Hayakawa. So he likes their plan. He's like, okay, I won't kill them. Rokuruta's main goal and his driving force of the movie is protecting Princess Yuki, who's the sole heir to the Akizuki clan, to the point where he sends his own sister as a decoy to be murdered in her place. lots of stuff happens. Tahei and Matashi repeatedly try to betray the Akizuki characters. Rokurota has a duel with an old foe, wins, doesn't kill him, and then after being captured, Yuki wins this guy over by singing and demonstrating that she's a compassionate leader and wouldn't have had his face Zuko'd by, like his lord did. He has a big scar on his face. Tadakoro betrays, this is this general. He betrays Yamana and, everyone escapes and lives happily ever after, except for Rokurota's sister, who is still dead without a head.
Yes. Good summary, I think.
Yeah, under 100 seconds. I couldn't do a minute, but I did under 100 seconds.
Yeah. Let's talk about, Let's first talk about kind of the way in which we can see how this inspired Star Wars, and then talk about some parts of the movie itself.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think one thing that really, because I think there are times where I think you look at a Western movie and then watch the movie that was also made, like, oh, this is a Western remake of that movie. Like
The Departed.
Yeah.
Which is like shot for shot from Infernal Affairs, basically.
Shot for shot from Infernal Affairs. The Magnificent Seven, which is a remake of The Seven Samurai. And that one, Kurosawa and John Ford, my understanding is, like, they were friends. Like, this was not, like, they kind of communicated about it.
Sure, yeah.
And John Ford is definitely a big admirer of Kurosawa. Mm-hmm. This is not a remake. There's massive plot differences.
For sure.
But you have three characters who I think are very clearly inspirational. And as you said, like, the Jawa scene is straight out of this movie with these two guys. Yes. I think it particularly also helps inform it that when you remember that Lucas's first idea was to make a movie where the droids were the two main characters, and other stuff was happening around them, and so you sort of get like, if he had made that movie, I still don't think it would be a remake, but it probably would have been closer to this. Because there isn't like a Han and a Luke. There's one character who's kind of Obi-Wan plus Han and a little bit of Jabba and a little bit of Alderaanian Palace Guard.
I was going to say it was like Anna Luke Salobi, basically.
Exactly. There you go.
It's like all of those. This one character got split up into a bunch of. And in early versions of Star Wars, I think Luke and Han were the same character.
Yeah, I think it's very true.
And then they kind of got,
and then, so the adventures they have, I think, becomes very different, but you can see that there's a lot of similarities, and certainly the princess, I think, is very much an inspiration for Princess Leia. We talked about how, even in the 70s, to have Princess Leia not be a damsel in distress, but to be, I mean, she technically is, but then she starts yelling at her captors and telling them they're too short and that their plans are stupid, and she takes over. And she's active and she fights. And I think having, they make a point in this one of saying that the princess, her father didn't have a son, and so they raised her as a boy. And so she wears pants and she has a stick that she uses. And she has some fighting ability. And, and I think that there's kind of some older people who are sad about that, but I think we're pretty most supposed to think that that's kind of dumb because she's just awesome. And so, it was kind of fun. I think those three especially are very much like inspirations for the three people who get into the movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just very direct, very clear. Yeah. She wears shorts. Everyone wears shorts.
Yes.
Like they're not wearing pants most of the time. It's like pretty short shorts too, which, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, definitely like pants as opposed to a skirt or a dress or a kimono.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, there's a couple of, and I don't think this is done for titillation factor. It's just historically accurate. There are a couple of people who are basically men who are wearing like the loincloth garment that like protects you in the front and then just goes up through the back. And
the back's just kind of the back.
We call it the thong. It's like, oh, yep, that guard is cheeked out, and there we go.
Right.
Something we have not yet seen in Star Wars, and I think probably won't, and probably for the best.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
What other kind of connections do you see between this and Star Wars?
Yeah, so I mean, I think those are the really obvious ones. I mean, also, Princess Leia is like the last of her planet. I mean, not necessarily literally, but like her whole planet gets destroyed. Here, the princess is her clan got destroyed, right? So that's a very direct kind of thing. There's also a a lengthy duel between two old, antagonists. I don't know. I don't know how to describe them. Like, basically there's the duel between, Rokurota and, Tadokoro, and it's this really long spear duel, which we can get into, and I don't understand spear combat at all. So like, I was a little confused. I don't know how much it's supposed to be realistic or what, but it's like really long, and the duel between Obi-Wan and Vader, reminds me of that.
Yeah.
And then also this is kind of the antagonist that we spend the most time with. Mostly Yamana is this like faceless, antagonist clan. We don't know if they're evil, and like, Akizuki is like good, right? It's just like they're antagonists. I think historically they were on different islands. So this isn't like really meant to be too much of a historical take. It feels like it takes place in the 1800s, right? When there's still swords, there's still spears, but there's also guns, like one-shot guns, basically, right? But yeah, I'll
just say, it could even be 1700s. Rifles made it to Japan in the 1600s with Portuguese, and I think these kind of rifles, 1800s. But one thing I think
so it could be earlier.
Yeah. Right. One thing I think, though, that it's definitely showing is, and I think this is something that you see in Star Wars, is, the tension between the martial artist and the nameless guy with a gun. And the idea of like, are you like a skilled warrior who belongs to this warrior tradition and culture, in which, the Jedi are very similar to samurai in a lot of ways.
For sure.
They're very similar to a white person's
They're intended to be. They're very clearly inspired by the idea of samurai that one might have growing up in California. Say.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to say it. And versus like, the nameless, faceless soldiers with guns. And that whole thing is a theme that in Japanese history that plays out a lot with the industrialization in the 19th century and stuff like that. The Rorori Kenshin movies, which we've talked about before, definitely cover that as well.
And series, of course.
Yeah. But I think all that was, you were talking about the duel itself, so continue with that.
Right. No, basically the duel, it feels to me like it served as partial inspiration for, Vader and Kenobi, these two people who knew each other for a long time. And, here they're dueling for the first time. He's like, I never got to face you. I always regretted that. And it's like, okay. And he's like, a duel? And it's like, in context, Rokurota is like surrounded by dozens or hundreds of enemy soldiers. And he's just like, oh, you want to duel? And then they duel, and then he leaves. Like, it's like, and it's respected that's the result of the duel. He says, I lost, and he's like, why didn't you kill me? He's like, you're supposed to kill me. But then later, that guy, who Luke doesn't kill, who Vader, who Mifune doesn't kill, he ends up turning on the Empire and freeing them, right? So that, like, the end of Return of the Jedi actually feels like, maybe it's not super directly inspired, but it's like, it's the same idea of like, the sort of head, general, the right hand, whatever, of the imperial power, or here, the rival clan, turns on their own team, because after they get spared, and it's like, it's not, he's paying him back for sparing him. It's because, Princess Yuki, demonstrates the power of song. Like, she's basically like, you didn't fail me, because Rokurota is like, I failed you, this is all for naught. And she's like, no, it wasn't. I got to see people as they really are. I got to see
this is when they're in the prison
wonderful.
And they all think they're going to die.
Exactly. After they've been captured at the end, and it's like, well, they've basically failed in their mission. And she's like, no, but I got to actually see the world. I was in a way that I wouldn't have ever gotten to see it if I was just living in a castle with people coming and paying tribute and treating me like a princess.
Right.
And then that compassion for, her basically failed servant, right, who didn't succeed in doing what he was trying to do for her, I think turned, Tadokoro, who's just like, oh, maybe things don't have to be awful.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it doesn't have to be like if you fail, then you get your face slashed across and you get beaten so hard that, you know, you're like, so.
And I think that's a very important point. And again, I'm not Japanese, but I'm not like an expert in the history, but the one thing I've studied a lot is World War II and the time period after that and sort of cultural shifts and how cinema often displayed them. And one thing I know is that's often talked about is that, you know, a big part of kind of the lead up to World War II was kind of a government of the military that had a lot of the military spirit of the time, in which, you know, honorable death in combat was, you know, what you looked for, and that to not die was shameful, and that to be taken prisoner or not commit suicide or die fighting was often considered very shameful. And you know, and so do I know this for sure? No, but I have a strong suspicion that was a very intentional thing of he thought he was supposed to die in combat. And then not only does he not and get punished for it, but then again, when he switches sides, there's a moment where he's like, you know, you go, I will, you know, fight to protect you. And they're like, dude, we've got a free horse, come along. And he's like,
exactly.
Yeah, why don't I just go with you? And to me, that was a very pointed, like, yeah, you know, that whole idea of like, you know, you have to honorably die instead of just getting away. Like, yeah, maybe not the best. So I really appreciated that.
For sure. Yeah. It's funny because it was getting towards the end, and like there was one thing that I really didn't like that we can, you know, talk about. And then like there at the end, I was like, oh, it's going to have one of these endings where like they just all get killed. Cause like, that's the way some movies end, you know? And then it was like, oh, it had this kind of happy ending of like, that's like uplifting and, you know.
And I think that's very much intentional, because after she sings that song, there's like a line or two of dialogue, and then it all goes black. And it stays black for a good second. And I was utterly convinced that was the end of the movie. And I was like, that's pretty metal. Okay, I can take that. And then it comes back up to the escape and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. And if you want the unhappy ending, you could just stop the movie there and be like, yeah, it's very sad. Yeah. It's tragic. They all died. That's how things go.
So this is...
You could pretend it's Game of Thrones, whatever.
This is more on the movie making side of things. I do know a little bit about spear fighting. You know, it's something that, like, I think spears are often thought of as just thrown weapons. They're not. And that the fighting style that we see, where it's kind of a sword fight with very long swords, and just the blade is at the end. Watching it, though, there were two things that I noticed as I was watching it. One is that, and this is something we talked about some after the scene in Rebels. I'm about to spoil something from season 3 of Rebels. Season 4 of Rebels. I'm going to spoil something from Rebels. If you haven't seen all of it, maybe skip ahead for 30 seconds, where Obi-Wan kills Darth Maul. And it's not an epic duel. It's like three slashes of lightsabers, and he's dead. And part of that's because that actually is how a lot of samurai sword fights went. And in this movie, when people use swords, often the other person's killed, like, almost immediately. Mm-hmm. Spears... I feel like if you wanted to shoot, it may be historically accurate that longer duels with spears made more sense, but also I think that given the technology of the day and what they were doing, filming the kind of samurai sword fight that we're used to, just because they're very close to each other, the swords are moving very quickly and slashing against each other, and often you think about in fights like that, there's constant camera angle shifts. I think it would be very difficult to do that, especially in the kind of style that they're doing. And so having the fight be the two of them basically always being 6 feet apart so they can be separately mic'd, among other things, and kind of poking at...
I wouldn't be confident that they were separately mic'd for what it's worth in 1958.
Yeah, in a way I think it would probably be harder if they're like as close to each other as they are in a sword fight. But also it allows for that, like, it's probably like a 5-minute scene with maybe 20 or 30 seconds of actual, like, spears hitting each other. It's a lot of, like, parry, thrust, back away, circle for a little bit, attack, parry, thrust, etc., back away again. And
there's a lot of shouting, right?
Yeah.
Like kiaiing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is like, it's as a martial artist, I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, I certainly had plenty of fight. I had one fight. It was like 4 minutes. I think it was 2-minute rounds. It might have been 2 90-second rounds. And like, I don't think anyone really threw anything in the first minute. It was just like, you're just trying to get a read, trying to see how someone responds. If you throw this feint, that feint, you shout at them and see if it like freezes them. It's like, it's a thing. And it was just interesting to see that in the context of like a spear fight, which I'm like, I don't really know how these weapons work.
Yeah.
But like, it felt like it had a lot of drama.
Very much. Right? Yeah. It was not boring in the slightest. It made me think about how if this was being done in a modern movie, often you would intercut all those scenes of them kind of circling with shots of people in the crowd watching, or like someone offering a bet to someone else, or like that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Or you would cut to the other scene with the peasants, and then you would come back to this or something. Exactly. To make it feel faster.
You know more about martial arts. I know you fight unarmed, obviously, but and you also know more about filmmaking than I do. Does that make sense, that idea of that the spear fight might just kind of work a lot better? It might be more historically accurate, but also just kind of work better for what they're doing and the technology they have at the time?
A little bit. So in terms of the mics, like I think they probably just had like one mic. Yeah. Most of the time is my guess. I'm not certain, but yeah, in terms of them kind of, you get, you're going to have broader shots, basically, right? There's, I do know that Kurosawa was like known also for sword fights, and I actually this morning trying to find a source of like a Japanese speaker saying some of the names. I was looking at something, and I mean, I'm sure I'm still not going to do a great job, but I'm going to do my best. But like I was watching a scene where he's talking about, it's Tatsuya Nakadai in about shooting Sanjuro, and he has this scene where he's like facing directly Toshiro Mifune, and like I watched the scene. They show the scene. It's like seconds long, and I was like, oh, I feel like Dave Filoni watched this just before writing that exact scene that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's
about true. Maul and Obi-Wan, and like maybe not, maybe not. There's a lot of sword fights throughout history, but I was just like, and he was talking about how they did the fight, and how they went about it, and that it was like that the process was, it was like surprising, and like nobody knew exactly how it was going to go. And I think the script actually said the action that will take place cannot be described in words on the page or something like that.
That's awesome.
So like I do imagine that a spear fight provides a different sort of the opportunity for a different kind of spectacle, a different kind of tension, but also, like, if sword fighting is generally going to be more like, it's over, then, well, if it's a duel and it's like, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's like, yeah, let's do spears. Yeah. Like, do you want to play a game of bullet chess, or you want to play a classical game? Let's play daily. You get a day for a move, right? It's like, so I do think there was an idea. I think it's more about the pacing of the fight. Yep. But also the framing of it, and they have these big wide shots because they have these spears, they're long spears, and they show the crowd. Yeah. They don't do close-ups on the crowd. They're not cutting. It's not fast cut, right? But it is like they show and the crowd like backs up and then comes in like, ooh, it's like there are reactions from the crowd without being like, okay, let's pull in tight to get a reaction shot. It's like, no, it's,
in one of the brilliant, like, oh, look, they just had an actor do a stagehand move. So he rides in on this horse, gets off the horse, and then he's like going to different soldiers to test their spears to find the right spear he wants to fight with. And one of them, he takes the guy's spear, like, no, it's no good, throws it down, and in shame, the guy walks off to take his horse and then take the horse out of the shot. I was like, that's brilliant. Like, it makes total sense he would do that, but also it's like, how are you going to have this fight with this horse sitting right there?
Yeah. You gotta take the horse out of the shot if you're going to be doing this long combat scene, like, with a lot of shouting.
One other thing I thought was really noteworthy in that scene is, at one point they're kind of battling in this, kind of a little bit like a collection of walls that are made of the flags of the Yanada. Is that how you say it?
Yamana? Or it might be Yamana, but it's
Yamana, thank you.
Yeah.
Of that clan, their flags are kind of like hung from these wooden things that are kind of like making little like separations and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And during the fight, the general from that clan, not our hero, is like slashing at our hero through the flags and is often cutting them and like ripping them open. And I thought that was an interesting bit of foreshadowing of that maybe he is more like he's more connected to his fellow samurai and the samurai code than the clan necessarily that he was fighting for. And again, I know little bits of the history. I know that often like the person might be of the clan themselves, but often they were, a clan would hire a samurai and their troops to kind of work for them and fight wars and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So whatever his connection is to the clan, I thought that was just a cool bit of foreshadowing of him, like in his attempt to fight the other samurai, destroying the flags of his lord, who winds up being so bad to him.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I didn't pick up on that at all, but that's a great spot. Yeah. And that's really cool.
What other things? So there's something about the movie you didn't like or other high points you wanted to mention?
Yeah. Well, so the one thing I really didn't like was, you were just calling him our hero. And I'm like, I think like Mifune is like a fantastic actor. He's so good. Just the moment he walks in and he's just standing there, it's like, oh, that's the guy. Yeah. This guy is the guy. And like, he's awesome. And like, the character's very cool a lot of the time. He sends his 16-year-old sister to go get beheaded to like buy like a day's time or something and distraction. Like, it doesn't even work that well.
Right.
Like, they figure out pretty quickly, oh, wait, no, that wasn't the princess. Oh, using a double's nothing new. Yeah. It's like, geez, monarchy is just the frickin' worst. This is where, our good friends at the, Hype is My Superpower podcast were talking, in our little chat thing, like, about monarchy. Like, if you're telling a story about monarchy. Yeah. And I do think it's interesting because here it's like he's basically, I am doing my job to serve the monarchy, and it's like, to the death, right? For all of us. And the princess is like, I hate it. I'm 16, she's 16. Like, why should I live and she should die? Why should she die so I can live? Yeah. And like, and so I feel like it was like a little critical of that, like in story, right? Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, oh, these monarchies, it's just these.
Yeah. And like, both he and some of her older advisors kind of, the point they make is like, no, she was honored to do this. She happily did it. And like, okay, well, I wish we could have heard her say that,
Right, exactly.
But I do think, I think that what they do with the character of the princess is one of my favorite things in the movie. There's another scene where, I will say for me, one of the low points of the movie, it's not quite to Game of Thrones level and it's never shown, but the movie is very happy to tell you about the general attitude of women in times of war, the general attitude towards women in times of war, of being, things you could buy and sell and use against their consent in whatever ways you wanted to. And that's pretty horrific. Again, it's not shown on screen in any way, which I definitely do appreciate. But one thing that is nice is that, and again, showing the princess, like, because she has a little bit of that kind of the innocence of, I don't know how the real world works, but the power to say, but it's dumb. I don't want the real world to work like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And so at one point, which actually is a thing that happens in Game of Thrones. And now I wonder if
I was going to say,
because at one point she is in an inn and she's listening to these men talk about wanting to purchase her and how there's another girl who they have already purchased. And he's like, her owner, pimp, is enslaver, is offering her, and so she goes to the others and it's like, you have to buy her. You have to buy her. Yeah. And they wind up selling their horses and like switching to this cart system in order to do that. So yes, I like how empowered she is, and I like how much she is like not okay with the way things are. And that thing about the princess, it's funny that wouldn't be why I thought that he's not a heroic type. It's also because he's kind of an ass to our peasant friends.
Well, yeah,
our peasant,
but they also repeatedly try to betray him, and like they're not the best.
Also
you know
true.
What I mean?
Yeah, like. R2-D2 as lovable scamps is something that Lucas, R2 and C-3PO turned up the morality on those two characters quite a good deal.
I don't know. I just feel like they're both 3PO.
Yeah, that's fair. That
3PO is like, oh, we've been abducted by these rebels, and and then they have to fight and blah blah blah, and
Yep.
Spoilers for Rebels episode 3 or 4.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know if this was intentional, or maybe this is just me reading my own politics back into it many years later. Yeah. I don't for the most part, I'm not angry at the peasants, because I think part of what you're seeing is like, wait, why does this gold belong to like the princess, and the nobility?
Sure.
Especially because when her noble advisors talk, they're very clear to be like, they totally look down on these peasants. They think the peasants are idiots. They're going to use them as scamps, and they don't plan to pay them. And we earlier saw how they kept getting caught up in war, because the other big generals are just like, oh, you look like you might be part of the clan. Now later they then talk about doing horrible things to the princess when she's sleeping, and that's when I'm like, okay, well, there went my ability to be, kind of on their side to that extent.
Right. Well, and to me, it's like, if you want to steal the gold, whatever, steal the gold. Yeah, I mean, you get yours, you know. But if it's like, oh, we're gonna turn them in so they can get beheaded, and we get 3 gold pieces, no, that's for me. But to each their own. I wanted to comment on the kind of the end scene where I felt like, I share some of your discomfort, but also I kind of liked how they handled it, where I feel like they're showing kind of not even showing, it is more telling, right? Yeah. Kind of this is kind of how this works in these, situations. And then the actual outcome was favorable, right. And, I thought it was funny, hilarious, appalling how they're all like, oh, well, she's cute, to the princess. And they're like, oh, no, she's mute. They're literally they're fine with sexual slavery, right? But they're like, oh, but if she's disabled, or I'm like, really?
Yeah.
That's a deal breaker for you in this scenario? Seriously. And that to me speaks of the, maybe the ableism of the times as well, right? That someone wouldn't even be physically attractive because they couldn't speak. Whereas I think some, some misogynists would see that as a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I saw one recap that was referring to the girl that they purchased and freed and tried to be get lost. She's like, no, I'm sticking with you. Who incidentally was of the same clan.
She'd been captured in the war.
Right. So I think there's a little bit of she's like, no, that's one of my people, right. And I'm responsible for, which I almost undermines it a little bit. But I saw her referred to as a prostitute. And I'm like, I don't think that's what that word means.
Yeah.
I think the term you're looking for is sex slave, so yeah, not in a, kinky way, right. In a, no, this is literally someone is being imprisoned and forced to,
Yeah. Sex work, you would hope that there's at least some degree of consent given. Often, unfortunately, there's not today.
Of course.
Much more often than people think there is.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think calling her a prostitute really kind of denigrates, really kind of puts a veneer on really the horribleness of what's happening to her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One little detail I thought about that. One little detail that threw me, and it just got me onto a Google search for dumb reasons. But so one of the things that there's kind of a plot point in the movie, kind of part of the MacGuffin of it all, is, as you said, they've hidden these bars of gold that all have the insignia of the princess's clan on them in sticks of wood. And the idea being that they've hollowed out these sticks that just can look like firewood that people are carrying around, and but in them are the gold, and they find them actually when one of them is fighting with each other. The R2 and C-3PO are fighting with each other, and they break the stick and they find it. And it's an ingenious idea. I really like it. I'm kind of curious if it ever happened historically. But then they get caught up in a fire festival, which is this like awesome, it's a great scene. It's an awesome kind of like, and I'm sure it has a lot of roots in Japanese history that things like this happened. That's where the princess hears the song that she then sings later. And part of it is they're trying to just kind of blend in, but people see them with this cart full of what they think is firewood and like, hey, throw that in the fire, throw that in the fire. And they can't argue too much or else they'll be suspicious. And so all of it gets thrown in the fire.
Yeah, no, but just to clarify, they decide to throw it in the fire. Rokurota says throw it in the fire.
Right, yeah.
It's the circumstances that compel that, but he's just like, no, just stick it in. We're going to be fine.
Right. I think he means it in a like, because we're going to be looking suspicious and be captured if we're not. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I'm just saying it wasn't an external force that just pushed it in. Yeah. It's like they decided, and the peasants are like, no. He's like, shut up, just do this. Yeah. This is the way we're going to get through this.
Definitely. And because what happens apparently is that once the fire burns out and everyone's gone, they're able to find all these gold bars in the ashes.
Yeah.
Now, at first, I thought since gold was fairly soft, it had a low melting point. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And I looked it up, and it turns out gold actually has one of the highest melting points of any metals. Its melting point is at about 1,800 degrees. I think it's like 1857 or something like that. These degrees Fahrenheit.
That's pretty hot.
Okay, that makes sense. But then I was like, wait, what's the temperature at a bonfire? And then I kept looking and said, oh yeah, in big bonfires, temperatures will often get up to like 2,000 degrees.
That's even hotter.
It's even hotter. And so, like, the idea that at the end of it, they have these still, like, perfectly pristine bars of gold, I was like, I'm not going to roll my eyes too much. It's a little bit of an eye roll, but I don't know if people had done that measuring yet. That's fine as a MacGuffin. Go for it.
Yeah. Just a real momentary.
I'm using
term.
the word MacGuffin wrong. Yes, I realize that.
I'm just like that's not what that
as
word
a plot
means.
point.
But yeah, and just sort of it is a hand wavy like, oh yeah, this is fine, and it's like, I mean, if it says up to 2,000 something, maybe it's not always that. Maybe it's possible. Maybe the reason they could only find some of the gold is because some of it melted and some of it didn't. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was like, is that going to melt? And if it, because I think there's metals, like if you set like the fire will burn a different color.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But then maybe people just be like, oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
But like, yeah.
Who knows?
Anyway.
That's our science deep dive. We can move on now.
Yeah. Maybe the fire did burn a different color, and since it was black and white, we just couldn't tell.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe wood is maybe it's that, like, by the time the fire actually gets directly to the gold, all the wood has burned to ash, and so the fire's dying down. Like,
sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how hot it gets inside a hollow piece of wood when the piece of wood is on fire. I mean, there are wood ovens, so anyway, it doesn't matter. Not going to go down this.
I shared your kind of like, I wonder if this really would work. But, okay, it's fine.
But also, I mean, given the amount of plot holes like that I have with most modern movies, if that's the only one I had, we're winning as a movie. So
sure, yeah.
Any other comments on the movie you had?
Not a lot. I mean, I didn't take notes. I just had a few things here that I jotted down while we were chatting. I would say that also in terms of Star Wars connections, Stormtrooper aim quality seems to be, commensurate with whenever any of these people are shooting at any of the main characters, except for the freed girl who then does get shot and then is like apparently fine anyway. She's like, leave me. And they're like, no, we're not leaving you.
Yeah.
We paid 5 silver for you. No. So yeah, I just like overall, I'd say I enjoyed it. It took me a little to like really get into. But I mean, that's not super uncommon. I mean, the Batman, I was like the first 10, 20 minutes, I was like, I don't know about this. And by the end, I was like, this is the most well-made superhero movie ever.
Yeah,
so like,
true.
Because
there's a long distance from the end in those 10 minutes at the start.
There is a lot left. And this movie is over 2 hours, which, I don't know specifically the 50s, but I know historically for a long time movies were considerably shorter than they have kind of become recently, so it, I just thought it was,
I'll say quickly on that. a lot of movies at the time were shorter. The original Godzilla is like 94 minutes.
Right.
Seven Samurai is 3.5 hours.
Right. Yeah.
Kurosawa was known, like that was one of his things,
right.
was that he took his time a lot more than other movies.
Exactly. And it's interesting. I mean, to me, like, apparently, like, Kurosawa was not loved at first in Japan, like as a filmmaker, like his films, partially because a lot of people thought it was, like, did too many kind of Western things,
right.
But then also tons of directors and writers in the West, in Hollywood, in, other places, like, then were heavily influenced by Kurosawa. And, to me, I think it's great when people get influenced by, disparate influences, right? And aren't like, oh, I just only want to watch the things that are, right here. And it's, and I appreciate Lucas saying, like, yeah, this movie that I obviously copied a whole lot from, like, I did this is the movie, naming it and not kind of being like, oh yeah, I came up with all this stuff in a dream. I had a dream one night. And, I do think it's really important to name one's influences. And that doesn't mean that you're stealing whatever it is, and I mean, obviously there's a whole lot of stuff that, we can talk about in that kind of vein, but like, I think, kind of sometimes you can do something concrete within a film that's like paying tribute to something. And then sometimes it's just like outside of your actual film, just kind of talking about influences. And that's something as a musician that I think is so super common,
for sure.
And I mean, it happens in film as well. I guess I kind of wish that more people took the time to kind of listen to what their favorite filmmakers talk about, learning from, being inspired by, and then go and actually watch some of that, know? And I
think it's a good point. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I would have gotten around to watching this without the strike. And I think that's a mistake.
Sure.
And especially because, like, I hadn't known about this one, but the Kurosawa influences are all over Star Wars. And that's both, in the original movies, obviously, but up to, the very recent. There is both an episode of the Clone Wars and an episode of Mando that is very much a remake of the Seven Samurai.
Oh yeah.
Which, by the way, there's something like 30 different TV shows or movies have been inspired. It's an incredible movie.
Tons, yeah.
Yeah, and it's very much kind of the, like, anytime you think of, like, a band of misfits and people who society has given up on come together to defend a town or defend a thing, like that's a cliche trope. It's a trope that Seven Samurai really kind of started, at least in cinema, or at least put its stamp on. But also, as I said, the Seven Samurai there. And then, if you've heard people talk about how The Last Jedi has the Rashomon scenes, where you have the same scene of Luke confronting Ben when Ben is waking up from 3 different perspectives. That's something that happened in Rashomon, which is another Kurosawa movie. So yeah, these influences definitely run deep. And yeah, I'm just glad we're talking about them.
And I just want to mention that one year my mom gave me DVDs for The Seven Samurai and The Magnificent Seven.
Oh, cool.
So I got to, like, watch them, like, back to back and kind of see how, one is a direct adaptation, really, of the other one.
Very much so. But as you said, also, like, Seven Samurai has some Western influence, like, not Western culture, but, like, the Western style of movie had some influences on. So yeah, so it's kind of a fun thing around. If you still have those DVDs, it'd be fun to do those 2 movies at some point for a superhero.
That'd be great.
I think it'd be great. All right, well, again, it's a great movie. Definitely recommend people watch it. Recommend that people check it out, and certainly if you have thoughts about it, either having watched it or not, let us know in feedback, because so much happened. I very much apologize. We have a backlog of feedback. I'm not going to do, like, all of it at once. Some of it's Rebels specific, so I want to do that when at least Riki, but hopefully Riki and Sarah are both on the podcast. But I want to talk about some of this with Paul now. And first, we got a couple of comments about the strike, a couple of kind of, like, quick comments, but then one particular email that raises a good question that we'll talk about. Some people just, very positive. One person said, "Thank you for taking a stand. I'm excited to get this chance to hear about non-screen Star Wars. Union strong. You guys rock." One person said they are unsubscribing because we have gone too woke. Which I was like,
what podcast were they listening to?
Yeah, how are we not, like, every time we get a because every now and then we do get a message that I'm like, what? I'm deeply offended that you ever heard a full episode and didn't come away thinking we were somewhat woke. Like, what the hell?
I mean,
I think woke.
I have, yeah. Well, go ahead. You go.
That you didn't come away thinking that we are what you mean when you say the word woke. Which,
yes, perfect.
But we did get a full email also from Emma. Emma writes, I appreciate the stand you're taking, and I really hope the actors and writers get what they need. But are you really not going to cover Ahsoka when it comes out? I understand why, but I've gotten so used to watching Star Wars along with you, I'd hate to not have your commentary when the episodes are coming out. Emma. Paul, I'll let you kind of respond first.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, it was a decision that I made unilaterally.
Yeah.
I did not. Paul was one of the many friends who I talked to about it, but it was my decision. So I'm not asking Paul you to defend my decision. Just, what your thoughts are.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'll say I don't know whether I would have made the same decision.
Uh-huh.
I don't run a podcast, right? Like, I enjoy being on your podcast and occasionally on another podcast, but like, it's not a big deal for me to not cover a given thing, right? I cover things when I'm like, oh, I love that, I want to talk about it, you know, and then, we might as well record it, right? But like, that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I will say also, a while ago, but right at the beginning of the strike, I was thinking, without anyone saying anything, just like, do I want to cover any of it? Do I want to be on any podcasts of, things that are coming out new? Is there a difference between things that are new, things that were from before? What do I want to do with regard to whatever? Also, though, after watching Mandalorian season 3, I have like several thoughts on Ahsoka, including like, first of all, I would just always like to watch a series all at once or in my own rhythm, right? And I don't know. I don't know if I would even want to be doing day by day, right? And we talked about it a little bit before you came to this decision. I was like, yeah, I probably would be willing to, just because I enjoy the experience of doing it with you. Mm-hmm. And, but then also like, going forward, like, I'm like, this timeline, I don't like where this timeline goes. Yeah. Like, I really want to see live action Ahsoka. I really want to see live action some of the other characters who might show up there. I wish it was more in the Rebels time period, but then again, like, I don't want her in the Andor show. I think she needs her own show, and those things shouldn't really, cross particularly much. But I'll also say, like, first of all, it's up to the producers, right? Yep. Or the studios or whatever. Like, they can end the strike tomorrow. Yep. By just acceding to certain demands or coming to the table and making, good faith negotiations. So, there's an extent to which is like, you don't know whether you're covering Ahsoka, right? It seems like they have said they don't want to come back to the table until October when they think, the writers will be hungry, basically. Like literally like having a hard time paying for things. And, that's atrocious. Yep. And that makes me go like, well, whatever the unions do that I don't love, like, this is clearly worse. And so I know whose side I'm on, regardless of like whatever specific actions I want to take. But I'll say another thing, like, I tried so long to get my mom to watch Andor because she didn't have the thing, to watch it. And she's finally watching it. Loving it, of course, because, she has taste. And she watches an episode and then she listens to our podcast. Yeah. And then actually, she watches an episode. She calls. We chat about her impressions of the episode. She listens to the podcast and then we talk about all these thoughts about the episode. And then she watches another one the next day. So like, I'm not saying you should withhold your viewing of Ahsoka, but like, it's an option, right? Yeah. Like, Matthew, I assume you are going to watch Ahsoka at some point, assuming that, the strike ever gets resolved. And I assume at that point, you'll probably do coverage, possibly episode by episode, possibly, overall. I don't want to put anything on you, right? That's, you can
let you finish, then I'll kind of talk about where
But if you do, a viewer can also, it can be your second watch. You can watch it yourself the first time and then watch it the second time. I understand for me, the reason I watch things when they come out, when I do, is because spoilers. Right. Yeah. It's just like, I would love to wait and whatever, but it's just like, I'm like, am I going to, I literally found out a spoiler for Spider-Man No Way Home the day before I saw it. And I didn't see it until it was on streaming.
Oh, and, you went that long. Wow.
I went that long without like significant spoilers about particular characters' appearances. Mm-hmm. And then I saw the actual spoiler for it. And then the next day I watched it and I was like, great. Yeah. It was like, whatever. But, I feel you there, for sure.
Yeah, so I got a lot of thoughts on it. And I definitely appreciate where you're coming from and agree. I think we're mostly in agreement. I want to kind of comment that I think part of what I think is causing confusion is that, and I admit I was confused for a while and sought out hearing from other people, is that I think that the union is doing the best it can. I'm not really putting them at fault for this, but I do think that the communication that's been coming out has been confusing at times. First, in part because, and I think part of this is how also the content sphere, and then I love Neil Gaiman, but I think he kind of became, a lot of people were looking to him, and some of the stuff he was posting was not necessarily always the most accurate. Part of it is I think there's been a lot of confusion again between what are the union rules and how those rules apply to people who want to be in the unions one day versus the things that they're saying of, hey, we'd like you to do this if you are supporting the strike.
Yeah.
And the further confusion is because right now we're using words like influencer and content creator, and no one has any idea what those words actually mean. And there are some definitions by which it is a kind of narrow definition, which the union sometimes uses in its language, especially for rules, is when you are doing paid promotion. And there are definitely, and this is anything from like, hey, we'll give you free tickets because we know you're going to do, you're generally in positive of it, to like, we're inviting you to the premiere, to, we have a check with you that we want you to make like 5, TikToks about this in a week, etc. And I think it's a lot of folks like myself, really not sure where we fit. I'm certainly not getting paid money in the studios. I make some amount of money from podcasting. Some is from the Patreon, and I love you all from it, but that's still a very small amount. Some is from those ads that you hear. It's not my full income, but I definitely am working. It has been growing steadily, and I would like it to eventually be a significant part of my income. And so, and I want to, there's a part of me, honestly, that feels like when I'm saying, oh, I am a content creator, and so I am one of the brave ones who SAG is asking not to do this, and so I will do it. Part of me is like, am I having delusions of grandeur? Like, we get about 800 to 1,000 downloads per episode, which is definitely good. We're in like the
Ahsoka would probably be on the higher end of that.
Yeah, right? Yeah. When things like Ahsoka come out, when Mando comes out, we go up into the 1,500s often. That puts me in, I think, like the top 10% of Star Wars podcasts. But that's because there's tons and tons of podcasts out there that have like 3 people. Or like where they made an episode a year ago and haven't done anything with it since, or something like that. Right. Like the numbers are all over the place. But here's kind of where I eventually came down on it. And first of all, I'll also say something, and this is now I'm kind of getting directly to your question. I will be honest with everybody. I hope that I would have made the decision if the strike happened a week before Ahsoka came out. But I don't know what I can't say reality what I would have done. What I can say is I did look at the calendar and did say to myself, I think there's a decent possibility that if there's enough good pressure that this will get settled before Ahsoka. And that was definitely a factor in my decision. As Paul said, the companies are now saying they want to not, do anything until like even October. So it may well be we're in that situation. It may well be that, and again, I worked in unions for a while, so I know something like union strategy. the kind of full boycott is it's a bullet in the gun that you don't want to use until you absolutely have to. I was talking with some other friend union organizer friends of mine from way back in the day, who were all saying that, like, among other things, the union is smart. And if they had tried to ask for a full boycott before Barbie came out, it would have just been a disaster, And like, if you look at like the incredible groundswell of support that movie has, and it being seen as such a like important feminist movie, the lines of where exactly you're promoting a movie or not, I will just say I agree with that. I saw the movie, and that's another factor I'll get into though in a second. But just because it was like one of the biggest movies, this weekend was one of the biggest. Or we're recording this shortly after the Barbenheimer weekend, as it was called, when those two huge movies came out. Do I think there's going to be a call for a full boycott between now and October? Quite possibly. Do I think it'll happen and then be enough to bring them to the organizing table before Ahsoka comes out in what is now about a month? A couple weeks ago, I would have said yes. Now I'm not sure. And so my hope is that at this point in time, I think that we will not cover Ahsoka when it comes out. That we will, as Paul said, do coverage of it when the strike ends. We will do our coverage of it then. Also, as Paul said, because part of why I did go to see Barbie and part of why I will watch Ahsoka when it comes out is I don't want to be spoiled. Although having watched Barbie and now not trying hard not to talk about it on social media has been driving me utterly crazy because there are great conversations going on about it. And part of me is like, but I don't want to take part. I don't know if I have the fortitude to not talk about the Ahsoka show if I watch it. What I might even do is like, we'll watch the episode, record the episode that week, and then just put it into the archives. And like the minute that the strike ends, drop all of those episodes, like one a day or something like that. I don't know. Am I going to promise you all now that I absolutely will not watch Ahsoka when it comes out? No. I want to see where things stand. I do think that, as Paul said, the big shows like this are often one of the ways we get in huge numbers of visitors. I'll say that I had a whole plan of like week by week things to bring in new visitors to get ready for Ahsoka. I'm not doing that intentionally. It's costing me some potential, but I think it's worth it. I think I probably won't cover Ahsoka when it comes out if the strike is still ongoing, but I'm gonna see what's being said. I'm gonna see what the union is saying. I think we'll have had 4 more weeks, maybe even longer, 5 or 6 more weeks for other content creators and like all these conversations to get kind of a little bit more decided. And I will say that part of why I decided to do it is because a lot of the other Star Wars content creators that I really respect also decided not to keep making content. And I was like, I respect your decision making, and I think that's a good reason not to as well. I want to see what they do. I want to see what some other folks do. I want to see what happens with the union. Like if the strike is still on, but some real breakthroughs have happened, what the union is advising. Certainly if there's a boycott called for, then I will have canceled the Disney Plus and I won't watch it. I'm fairly certain I won't watch it. Or I'm fairly certain I won't podcast about it if the strike is still on, but there's a lot of factors. And I just want to say, we'll see what happens when we get there.
Cool. Yeah. I actually have a few things I want to say. One, I wanted to say that I really respect that, the amount of consideration you've given to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you are taking the stand that you feel is right. And that's the only thing anybody can do.
Yeah.
Right. Is say, this is what I think is the right thing to do. And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you're not sending your sister off to get beheaded, but like it is an actual sacrifice, right? Like you are giving up money, exposure, and the opportunity to do something you love at a time that it's a very good time to do that thing.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that I respect that a lot.
Thank you.
And then also, to the writer of the feedback, that I love that you like to watch the thing and then listen to the pod, and it's kind of like watching it together. I love that sentiment. Personally, I probably won't No, I'm not going to watch it when it comes out. Unless, like, you convince me that, like, watching it and then recording a thing and then releasing it later, like, makes sense. I like to not make too big of pronouncements about what future me is going to think makes sense, because I always want to be open to an argument that I'm like, I hadn't thought of it that way. Let me think about that. Yeah. Okay, you make a good point, and I've changed my mind, right? I think the ability to change one's mind is power.
Very
right?
much, which is also why I'm not making the declarative statement. Yeah.
Right. I think it's exceptionally unlikely that I will watch it when it comes out. I'm more of a, like, Han shot first kind of person, where I'm like, I would fire the big gun right away and be like, no, I want everybody to stop giving you any money. Like, this is, and, like, let's go. Yeah. But, like, it's like at the end of Iron Man 2, it's like, why didn't you lead with that thing that just destroyed everything? But, like, that's fine. But also, I don't actually really give any of these companies money in the first place. So, like, I'm not really, it's like I don't really have any more to withhold from them.
If I start boycotting, Paul stops watching.
Exactly. Actually, I have alternative sources for things and I will acknowledge that, yes, then money does go to these things somewhat on my behalf. Yeah. Not literally directly on my behalf, but, like, I obtain value from money that is sent to them by various entities. And then just one last thing that I'd say is that I think, you brought something up that I think, I think solidarity is easier than trying to take a stand alone, and that's not to undersell the effort that goes into solidarity, but that when a bunch of people who you respect, a bunch of people who can benefit from the situation by not taking a stand are taking that stand, it's much easier to be not just to go with it and to be like, yeah, we're all going to do this, because first of all, there's a much better chance it's going to have, like, a significant effect. Yeah. And second of all, it's not the same kind of opportunity cost of, like, well, I'm missing out on revenue and they're not. And so they're actually grabbing my market share and whatever. It's like when there's one crack in the dam, kind of like, the river's going to break free. And historically, personally, I've often been like, the things that I've taken stands on are not things where my individual action is, like, causing huge ripples and whatever, but I do like the idea of solidarity. And I have seen, I'm talking about, like, being a vegetarian or whatever, right? I have seen, like, the power that, like, when the numbers go up, it causes an effect on industries, like the dairy industry changes its behavior because there are a lot of people who aren't consuming dairy, right? And it's like, being the first or being the last who finally plugs the dam, like, it doesn't matter. Just be, if you're, I don't know, whatever. Just do what you think you should do. Yeah. And I always have respect for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And certainly, if there's ever a point, you and I are not always in the same place. And I think I have some disagreements about the union stuff in terms of the way the unions are doing things. But I know we're both very much against on the side of the strikers. For sure. I can't imagine a time when I would be ready to podcast, but you weren't. But like where I felt comfortable doing so and you weren't. But, if that time came, of course, I'd always respect that. It wouldn't be, everyone do what they need. Sure. Yeah. I do have one potential guest who sometimes would come on who's like, I don't want to talk about Star Wars in any way, even the books or the content. Yeah. And I respect that. Like, I'll be the first to admit, we're talking about things that people are interested in probably because they saw the movies and TV shows. And talking about them may cause people to want to go see those again. And so is there an extent to which the entire Star Wars Universe podcast is by definition promoting the TV and movies? Probably. Am I making some choices to try and mitigate that? Yeah. Example, I've said I want to do book content. One of the books that actually I was planning to do as part of the road to Ahsoka was the Ahsoka novel. Because what better thing to talk about? And me and Aaron McGowan, who was on for a lot of episodes by now, the Bad Batch especially, both read the book to get ready to talk about it. And then I was like, I don't feel right doing that. It is a book. It's not on screen. It's a book. But to do it, if you read it, you're going to be even more excited to watch the show. Right. And so I may still record it we'll see. But there's a lot of good books out there.
Yeah.
Good.
Just on that note, like I do think it can be an opportunity though for someone to say, you know what, I'm going to read the book instead of watching the show. Like that's an option. Now, maybe at the end of the book, you're like, oh, but I really want to watch the show now. You know, I don't know. I haven't read the book, but at least Disney has always paid their authors the full amount that. Oh wait.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. And like, they're not calling, you know,
they're not calling for a strike because they don't have a union.
And it's funny because they're writers for Hollywood companies, and often the plots they come up with in those books appear on screen, but they're not part of WGA. That's a whole other fight that also should be a thing.
Although some are. Here's a question tangent land. If a book is written by a WGA author, like writer, so basically like someone who's in the writers union and maybe adapts their own screenplays, right, from their own material, do you feel like all of their books then you wouldn't want to cover? Or maybe this is too far down.
Yeah, no, to me it's nothing to do with the union itself. It's just specifically a book about the probably biggest show of the year that Star Wars is coming out.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we'll see. All right, we do have one other non-piece of strike feedback. We got a lot of feedback on that, but I want to just read this one as well. This is from Mandy T. Rebel. Great name. I finally got around to watching Andor, and I found your commentary. It was like watching it with friends. I love it. Here's my question. Who's a character who you would want to see get their own Andor-style show? Right? Yeah, it's a good one. I
mean, literally any character can have their own Andor-style show, and it will be one of the best shows of all time. Because to me, that's what it means to have an Andor-style show. Okay. But if what you mean is more specifically who deserves to get a full backstory show, who would I like to see that?
A backstory or a like what happened next. But like to take a character who is mostly there only as a side character in one of our main stories, which Andor is a main character in a movie that's basically a side story to our main characters.
Right.
But yeah, like someone like that, who would you want it to be?
I mean, I think you can just keep doing more characters from Rogue One. Like, I would like to see Chirrut and what's his name? Baze.
Yeah.
I'd like to see their backstory. I want to see what happens to them after, except they're just space dust now.
I was thinking, should I say a character or perhaps a pair of characters?
Yes.
But I was like, no, I think Paul's going to go there no matter what. So
yeah. No, I loved them in that. And I feel like they represent a really interesting, like what does happen to all the people who are into the Force and like Jedi adjacent after Order 66 before, the Battle of Yavin or even the Battle of Endor. Yeah. What do those people do? What does it mean to be one of them,
Yeah. And like I think you could do a story that's about the two of them and about kind of their journeys and I think they meet on Jeddah, but maybe they don't. But you could do it that, or I think you could even do like Jeddah be the show, and those two are the main characters, but maybe some others. And what we get is like 5 years on this planet, that is sacred to the Jedi, or maybe even like you start with Order 66. Order 66 has been on screen a lot, so maybe not, but like
maybe start a year after that.
But just like seeing what was life there like, and then the Empire taking over, and then eventually Saw Gerrera and his people kind of coming in, because I think his story is one that I would really love to see more of. So I think that would have been great. Saw Gerrera was one of the first people I was going to say. Because he's appeared a lot, but almost always as an antagonist to someone else's story.
Yeah, or like a rival almost, like, right? Like he's that, I forget there's like a very specific word for it, but like where he's sort of an antagonist, but he's actually on the same side.
Yeah.
Where they're like kind of trying to do the same thing, but he wants to do it in a different way.
Right.
Yeah. And I do feel like, would it be an Andor style show if it's someone like Saw who's already, spoilers, in Andor, but also like he's appeared in so many things.
Yeah.
But like you're right, it's never been the Saw show.
It's never been from his point of view, or even the point of view of someone in his group. So I think that could be really good. Trying to think of people who aren't. I had a couple ideas of people who aren't in Rogue One, but yeah,
who aren't in Rogue One?
But I think part of what made it so good, it was such a good ensemble. It's so many small characters. For a while we had talk about Lando getting his own show, and the idea of Billy D. Williams being kind of a narrator while
like over a game of cards, while Glover plays, the younger
Donald Glover is actually the person. Yeah, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I think there was that was in discussion at some point. Not, I thought for a minute, especially after watching this movie, if I'd want to see the droids get their own show. I don't think I would. I think we have seen so much of C-3PO and R2 at this point, and I don't know if I could take 2 hours of them bickering. And frankly, the episodes that were focused on them in Clone Wars and Rebels were often not the best.
And they're in so many episodes of so many things. I feel like it's no longer, that's not an Andor style. I mean, if you just mean just take a character who hasn't been a title character and make them a title character, sure. But it's it's like, doing a Leia show. Yeah. It's like, well, that would be awesome. Yeah. I think that would be awesome, especially after Endor, like an actual Leia show,
Yeah.
But that would be hard to do live action. It's like, what do you even do?
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not a fan of the I know Stan Sebastian looks like Luke. I don't need more Luke stories, and I definitely don't want Ghost AI type stuff.
It's funny how Rogue One, it was so interesting that Peter Cushing was in it, but also I remember at the time being like, "Is this okay?"
Yeah,
I was like, "This feels bad," and then re-looking at it, I'm like, it has more of at the time my brain didn't process it the same way, just in terms of the look of it, and it looks off to me now more than it did then, I think. But it's it's rough, it's hard, it's
on that strike episode I did with Riki, we actually talked a lot more about this in depth because AI is one of the major things happening in the strike. And I think as a counterexample, James Earl Jones made a contract with Lucasfilms. He went into a studio. They recorded enough of his voice that they can basically now use and he signed a contract and he got very well compensated where they can now use his voice in perpetuity for future Darth Vader characters. And I definitely don't love the AI visual. Maybe they're going to make that better. But to me, it's especially Peter Cushing was dead long before no one ever asked him. And even asked his family, I do believe that Carrie Fisher gave permission for that to be used as it was. But I don't know the details there. But yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's honestly so many. I think, I've often talked, the other one I would put is, and this isn't a specific character as much as just another behind the scenes kind of thing. I would love to see more about the Senate. I'd love to see more about either during the Republic or during the Empire. Just what that life was like. So yeah, great. So it was a great question. Paul, do you have any other kind of last comments on it?
No, I just wanted to kind of double down on the consent matters, aspect of if you're going to use AI to impersonate someone, if they say, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and do that. Give me this much money and we're good. Cool. Right. That's fine. I think the proposal to be able to hire an extra and download their likeness and then use them in perpetuity for a day rate is what are you? Honestly, the AI is the spot where I feel the studios and the union are both out of their mind. And I think it's probably because none of them have any idea what the technology is, what it is capable of, what it will be capable of, and what a reasonable way to move forward given, how fast it's going to change. And I think it's a question that requires a lot more than they're going to be able to do really probably, in the negotiation. So you're probably going to end up with something goofy. But to me, at the end of the day, consent is it's a big deal. It's just always a big deal. It matters to me.
And consent, especially in economic terms, when people are starving, and are willing to accept any kind of wages, even though it's a terrible deal, that's not a consensual employment agreement. And, I'm not saying, a background actor is starving, but when someone's trying to get into Hollywood and they may take, it's this is the only option you have. we should try to make sure that option, there's a reason why there's a minimum wage. There's a reason why there are minimum standards of contract. And for the union to be like, this is too much is completely fair. So yeah,
absolutely.
Emma, thank you so much for the comment, as well as Mandy and Dylan and everybody else who wrote in. And Dylan, of course, we talked about how he joined the Patreon. It's very easy to join. It really helps this podcast, helps me do all the things that we're doing. And right now, anything you donate, 25% of what all the Patreon donations will go to the entertainment fund. I believe that's what it's called. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. That's the fund for out-of-work actors, out-of-work writers. But also, like Paul mentioned, there's a lot, as like Paul's parents, there's a lot of other people who work on movies, and they're in unions. Their unions aren't on strike. But like the people whose jobs are catering movie sets, the people whose jobs are security at movie sets, lighting, sound, all this stuff, costuming, most of those people are not working right now. Some of them are being able to get other kind of jobs, but a lot of them aren't working, and they're in unions. They support the unions. They're not, making it. They're not fighting against it. They're supporting the unions, but their members are suffering too. And so I'm really glad that the strike fund that SAG helped set up is being distributed among those folks as well. So yeah, 25% of the patrons will go to that. And I'll talk more about how to give us feedback and the like. But first, Paul, where can people find you?
I don't even know. I used to be Zen Madman on Twitter. Apparently now I'm Zen Madman on X or something. I don't even know. I'm
going to keep tweeting.
I'm Zen Madman in various places. You can find me various places, and like eventually maybe I'll have some more coherent spiel. But like for now, I don't know. The world is on fire, and I'm just trying to stay in the air conditioning.
Look, when I type in twitter.com, I get to the right site. I don't know where I would go if I typed in x.com, but I don't think it's family friendly.
I don't think you want to find out.
And so I will keep calling them tweets, and I will keep using the word cisgender right until Elon kicks me off. And frankly, like I've not.
Oh, it takes you to Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I guess he.
No, x.com.
I guess he bought that. Wow. So well done.
That's an expensive domain name. I mean, that's some commitment to the bit.
That's probably at least 1 or 2 emeralds from Daddy's mine that got used to pay for that. So, yeah. So I am still on Twitter. I've not yet gone onto one of the sites just because we're still in that, like, every week it sounds like all my friends are going to a new one, and I don't have the patience to set up profiles and 5 different ones. So in like a couple months, I'm going to see where people have settled. It might be, there's a bunch of options out there. We'll see. If you've got suggestions for me, feel free to write and let me know. But of course, you can still find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook, on TikTok, and you can email me. All that information is in the show notes. But the best way to find it is go to theethicalpanda.com. And there you'll find information about this podcast, my superhero ethics podcast. Like I said, it's a little harder to find non-screen Star Wars content, although there is a ton. But, we've in the past had non-Hollywood screen content on superhero ethics, and now it's all we're doing. And so we have stuff about Discworld, those books. We have stuff about Ahab, about the character of Ahab and disability and Moby Dick. I finally got around to learning the plot of that book. I did not read it, but in true American high school English class standards, I looked it up on SparkNotes, which is apparently what CliffNotes is now. And we had a great discussion with someone who wrote her thesis on Ahab and Moby Dick. So that was a great episode. We're going to do stuff on Godzilla, a lot of stuff. We're going to do stuff on some BBC things. There's so much great cinema that's happening outside of the United States. So take a chance, check it out. Check out Superhero Ethics. Check out Star Wars. If you're a patron, stick around. We got a little bit of bonus content, but just a little bit because Paul's got to go soon. Most of all, thank you all so much for listening. We have spoken. Welcome back, patrons. Thank you so much. We're going to have to keep this very brief because Paul has to go very soon. But Paul, I'm just going to ask you, I know you don't read the books much. What has been your contact with Star Wars off-screen?
I mean, I'm just going to hold something up for the non-viewing audience who can't see it, but this is a lovely Lego Darth Vader head that Matthew gave me for a holiday, and I assembled, and it was great fun. And I enjoy looking at Will Freeland's giant Millennium Falcon in the background. So I actually, this might be I think this is my first Star Wars Lego, but I had a bunch of the OG Star Wars. I had a Millennium Falcon, like the original one. I had a Chewbacca, and I think I lost the Chewbacca in a diner, and it was traumatizing.
Oh, I'm sure.
And they had the C-3PO in the little, it like came into parts and then fit in a backpack of Chewbacca's. So
that's awesome.
The Empire Strikes Back edition, I guess. Mostly like through the toys. I played the RPG back in the 90s with some friends, and we have a friend whose brother was like the most Star Warsy, person I think I'd ever known, in terms of just having their entire room was just outfitted solely with, the toys and I think they had the Lego sets by then, and like, just tons of Star Wars stuff. And I played some of the games. I played the Empire Strikes Back game actually for like Super Nintendo or something. And I played one of the Starfighter games like one time, you know, but so not huge, mostly just like the toys and like a little bit with the games. And, reading or listening to some like, George Lucas and Joseph Campbell kind of talking about sort of the hero's journey and whatever. And, I would say mostly toys and games. And whatnot.
Yeah, I think until recently I was like that. I had read the Thrawn novels when they came out, the original ones, and I really liked them. But then I tried some of the other extended universe stuff. It really wasn't for me. And then I think I'm of that generation that was, I think just, I don't want to say too old for Clone Wars, for the prequels, because I think a lot of people love the prequels. But I think a lot of people of my age, just the prequels were not my favorite, and I kind of went off Star Wars for a while. And then Force Awakens really was the thing that really brought me back. As many problems as I may have with the sequels, I think so much of them is fantastic. Rey is fantastic. I should say, I'm with someone who really enjoyed most of the sequels, the last one notwithstanding. And then when I saw the kind of part of, I think, the problem with the EU also was that it was so intimidating. It got to the point where, because I could have read those books as they were coming out when I was like 12 or 13. Yeah. But then you skip forward some years and it's like there's now 40 books, and like every book is they did a good job of referencing each other, although some of them contradict each other. But like it just felt like, where in the world do I get started? And so I just never did. And then when Star Wars started this whole new set of books, a lot of it filling in some of the gaps on things that I wanted to learn more about, like the Padme books that I haven't talked about, Queen's Shadow, Queen's Peril. I got really into those. But I think, honestly, the piece of Star Wars media that I think I probably most engaged with that wasn't screen was the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. These are games I had on a IBM, maybe 386, maybe even older. Like I think I had the first X-Wing. I think I had even pre-Windows maybe, and it was mostly a fairly simple space combat game. And granted, I'd not been playing many video games at the time, and so many other people would tell me this was actually a lot more common than I thought. But it actually had a story that was ongoing through it, and the Rebel one was fairly basic, but the TIE Fighter one, like you got to eventually become at first I was like, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to be like fighting for the Empire. Right. And eventually they realized like they were not quite in the point in the 90s of like, yeah, let's like be the bad guy for the whole game. So eventually you do, spoilers for a game that's 30 years old, eventually you do wind up joining the rebellion as a TIE Fighter pilot. Right. But yeah, I just really loved those. And I've enjoyed, I think Jedi Survivor was a great story told through a video game that I found far too difficult. That if you know platformers and good at hand-eye coordination, I think is probably a lot easier. I'm not that person. There's a Star Wars RPG coming out, like an open world kind of Skyrim kind of a game that next year, I believe, that I'm really excited for. And I think the books are great. The comic books are still the barrier for me. I just have not ever really been able to get into them. My visual acuity is really not good, but I love hearing people talk about them. And yeah, I'm just glad there is so much else out there besides the TV and movies. And even when I can't watch it, I love hearing people talk about it.
Yeah, I've actually really enjoyed the book podcasts that I've been on for the books that I didn't read.
Yeah.
You know, like it's fun kind of getting to sort of ask questions and listen to, you know, what's going on in those things. And most books you can dig into a level of depth that you can't do in most series.
Yeah.
You know, or movies. I almost like wouldn't want to read an Andor book, you know, because I feel like the series actually manages to kind of, I actually saw Tony Gilroy refer to it as a, like, more like a novel than a movie or a series, you know, and but I think that is the sort of thing, like, probably that maybe speaks to, like, I probably would like some of the novels, you know, if they're, I know the quality of writing varies, right? And sort of the target audience, I'm sure varies, but, I'm sure some of them are very well written, and just in terms of getting into, I tried that collection of short stories that you sent me a couple of the
from
stories.
A certain point of view, and you hated them.
And I love the idea. I did. Wait, what did you say?
The collections are called From a Certain Point of View.
Yeah.
Because they're all like little, not even really, they're like 3 to 4 pages often. So, they're
like flash fiction to short stories.
Yeah, exactly. Vignettes. And they're all from the perspective of like characters we never actually met or characters we saw for just a half second or two, but who are witnesses to important moments in Star Wars.
Right.
And they've now done that for multiple books or shows. And the first one is just called From a Certain Point of View, A New Hope. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the idea of it, but I just couldn't with the writing. Like you sent to me, and this, I don't want to say this will be everyone's experience. I'm sure it's not. If they've done multiple books, I'm sure plenty of people love them. But like, I actually had to look up the authors and be like, are these like professional authors, or is this a collection of fan fiction? And I'm like, oh, they're professional authors, but it is a collection of fan fiction. That's the thing about something like Star Wars.
Yeah.
Is like,
it's all fan fiction to some extent.
It's all fan fiction since, you know, the prequel trilogy, right? The prequel trilogy wasn't I mean, you could say Star Wars was fan fiction for the Hidden Fortress.
Right.
But like, you know.
Well, and like, there's a book that came out, a year or two ago that Riki and I actually covered in last week's episode. There's a book actually that came out a year or two ago that Riki and I covered, and you heard us cover it in last week's episode, Resistance Reborn. And it's not, I think some of the books are incredibly well written. And I also want to say, I think some fan fiction is incredibly well written.
Of course.
Some is not. But it wasn't my favorite book, but it did a lot of things. Like, as far as I understand, the author set out to say, okay, you know those massive plot holes from Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker? What if we fill in some of those? What if we give people some background? So, like, the book, the focus of the book is, okay, Leia put out that call on Crate and no one came. What do we do now? And so you get to see them change tactics and start to do new things that start to get more people on their side in a way just calling for help didn't. And so the whole armada showing up in Rise makes more sense. You get to see, again, here's the thing you can't really do in a movie, unless it's an incredibly well done TV show like Andor, you get to see much more of Poe's interiority, and you get to see him really wrestling with like the mistakes he made and the horrible cost it had. And also like some of the other pilots being like, why would we follow you? You made these terrible decisions. And I just really appreciate how much the book bridges the gap between those two movies. And in the same ways that like the TV show, The Clone Wars, I think bridges the gap between the second and third prequel movie in a lot of ways.
Right.
I think the gap is much larger to Rise of Skywalker. But however you see it, I think it was just, but it because it's trying to do so much, I think it suffers a little bit just as a work.
Sure.
But it was enjoyable, and there's so many things I read where I was like, okay, now this is something I can believe. Now I get this.
Right. It's like giving you a headcanon download.
Yeah.
Kind of like, like here's some ways that you can watch these movies and have them make sense together instead of just being like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, did the director of this even see that movie?
Among other things, Wedge is a major character in it. And how Wedge comes back into the Resistance is a major thing, rather than just like, oh, the actor had some free time, so we threw him in at the end of the movie along with everybody else.
Right. I feel like Wedge would be an interesting character, just like follow through the entirety of like his career, you know?
I mean, you could kind of do like, this is kind of going back to that feedback question we have, and then we really should wrap up.
Yeah.
You know, Wedge, I think, would be another one to get his own show, but instead of it being about like his life before or after, I think he would be kind of like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern version of the Star Wars movies.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's funny. I also, though, was thinking, like, actually Biggs would be an interesting character to have an Andor-like show. I mean, it's the same time frame.
Yeah.
And I don't know, who knows, maybe he'll show up. But, like, you know, just that sort of, like, leading up to the rebellion, like, how does someone who's, like, pals with Luke on Tatooine, like, then go and actually join the rebellion?
Right.
And, like, you know, like, what is that? Like, what was the rebellion then before we saw it, really?
Yeah. Like, yeah, I think, you know, we got some of Wedge's backstory in Rebels, but yeah, for something like Biggs or something like that would be all, especially because what has never been answered is when Luke wants to forward his application to the Academy. The only Academy we have actually heard about is the Imperial
right,
Academy.
Exactly.
And so was there just this line of like Wedge and Biggs and all these pilots going off to be Imperial pilots being like, cool, I got my skills, but I'm going to fly an X-Wing instead of a TIE fighter. See you later. I don't know.
Exactly. And like, how did the Empire deal with that? Like, did they know that they were also this pipeline? And like, then were the administrators at the Academy like, oh, you're in Slytherin. Okay, Gryffindor.
Yeah.
Sorry for the Harry Potter reference, but you know, I feel like it's, you know, or it's a school where it's like, good guys, bad guys. Like, who does that? That was always one of the things that I was just like, these movies are weird.
Yeah. Not to get into another topic. I am not you know, that name is dead to me, never mentioned again. I'm never going to promote it in any way. I'm never going to give money to anything involved with J.K. Rowling ever again. I'm going to distance myself from those who do. But yeah, like it is a cultural reference in our lexicon that
it is
used from time to time is fine. So anyway, all right. This has been awesome. Paul, thank you so much for all this. Thank you, patrons. You really make all this happen. We have spoken.
I can't swim.